Colorado forest was supposed to be a sanctuary, but today it smelled of death. Park Ranger Sophia backed away slowly, her boots scraping the edge of a 50-foot drop into a raging, icy river. 5 heavily armed mercenaries emerged from the shadows, their assault rifles raised, trapping her completely. She had just discovered their massive, illegal chemical dump, and they were never going to let her leave alive. A sniper lined up a fatal shot right at her chest. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But suddenly, a massive blur of black and tan fur exploded from the dense brush. Titan, a 90-pound military German shepherd, launched himself through the air, his jaws locking onto the sniper's arm. And right behind him, a lone Navy SEAL stepped out of the shadows, ready to declare war. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The Colorado National Forest usually smelled of pine and damp earth. Today, it carried the bitter scent of decay. Sophia tightened the straps of her green standard-issue ranger uniform backpack. She was a dedicated park ranger in her mid-20s, with auburn hair pulled back into a tight ponytail and sharp hazel eyes trained on the forest floor. She knelt beside a cluster of ferns. A red fox lay motionless in the dirt. No visible wounds marked its body. Several dead sparrows littered the ground nearby. Nature has a way of masking human corruption until it spills over, poisoning everything it touches. Sophia knew animal behavior perfectly. Predators did not leave untouched meals. Disease did not strike multiple species simultaneously in a tight radius. This was something else entirely, something unnatural and highly dangerous. She stood and scanned the surrounding woods. Deep tire treads scarred the muddy trail ahead. She measured the width of the tracks with her boot. They were far too wide and deep for any standard Forest Service vehicle. These treads belonged to heavy military-grade transport trucks. She tapped her radio to call the main station. Static hissed back at her. The signal was completely jammed. Someone did not want her communicating with the outside world. A cold chill crept up her spine. She unholstered her radio and placed her hand on her service weapon. She followed the tracks deeper into the restricted zone of the reserve. The trees grew thicker, blocking out the afternoon sun. The silence felt heavy. A twig snapped to her left. Sophia spun around. 3 men in dark tactical gear stepped out from the shadows of the towering pines. They wore unmarked black combat uniforms and carried assault rifles. These were not local poachers. Their movements were precise, coordinated, and lethal. "You wandered too far from the marked trails, Ranger," the lead man said. His voice was flat and devoid of emotion. Sophia backed away slowly. She kept her hand on her weapon. "You are in a restricted area of the National Forest. Drop your weapons and identify yourselves." The men ignored her command. 2 more armed figures emerged from the brush behind her. They formed a tight semicircle, forcing her backward. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The ground dropped off sharply into a steep, rocky ravine. A raging river roared 50 feet below. She had nowhere left to run. Less than a mile away, Jack sat by a small campfire. He was an active-duty Navy SEAL in his early 30s, with a military buzz cut, broad shoulders, and a rugged face weathered by years of intense combat. He wore simple hiking pants and a gray thermal shirt. He had come to the Colorado wilderness seeking peace, a temporary escape from the noise of war. Lying next to him was Titan. The massive black and tan German shepherd lifted his head. His ears swiveled toward the north. Titan was not a standard pet. He was a highly trained working dog, attuned to the slightest shifts in his environment. Titan let out a low rumble in his chest. He stood up and stared into the dense tree line. Jack instantly dropped his coffee mug. He trusted the dog implicitly. "Show me," Jack whispered. Titan darted silently into the woods. Jack grabbed his tactical knife and his sidearm from his pack, moving like a ghost through the underbrush behind the dog. His military instincts took over, replacing the sought-after peace with razor-sharp focus. They closed the distance rapidly. Jack heard the confrontation before he saw it. He peered through the branches. 5 armed men cornered a lone park ranger against the edge of a cliff. Jack analyzed the threat in seconds. Heavy weaponry, tactical formations, clear intent to kill. One of the mercenaries raised a sniper rifle, resting the barrel on a tree branch to line up a clean shot on Sophia. Jack tapped Titan on the shoulder and pointed at the sniper. "Go." Titan launched himself forward like a furry missile. He cleared the brush in a single bound. The sniper barely had time to register the blur of black and tan before Titan slammed into his chest. The dog locked his jaws onto the man's weapon arm. The rifle fired harmlessly into the sky. The man screamed as he crashed to the dirt under the weight of the massive animal. The other 4 men spun toward the noise. Jack did not give them time to react. He sprinted from cover. He grabbed the closest man by the tactical vest, driving his knee upward into the mercenary's chest and throwing him heavily to the ground. The second man raised his rifle. Jack deflected the barrel with his left forearm and delivered a crushing right hook to the man's jaw, instantly knocking him unconscious. The remaining 2 men realized the severity of the new threat. They aimed their weapons at Jack. Sophia drew her sidearm and fired 2 warning shots into the dirt near their feet. "Drop them!" she shouted. The sudden gunfire distracted the men for a split second. It was all Jack needed. He closed the gap, swept the legs out from under the 3rd man, and disarmed the 4th with a swift twist of the wrist. Titan stood over the sniper, baring his teeth in a silent, deadly threat. The skirmish ended in under 30 seconds. The mercenaries lay groaning on the forest floor. Jack kicked the assault rifles away from the fallen men. He turned to face Sophia. He kept his posture relaxed, but his eyes remained alert. "Are you hit?" he asked. Sophia kept her gun raised, her breathing heavy. She looked at the fallen men, then at the muscular stranger and his formidable dog. "No, I am fine. Who are you?" "I am Jack. This is Titan." Jack gestured to the German shepherd. "And these guys are not typical hikers." Sophia lowered her weapon slightly. She looked at the heavy truck's tracks leading deeper into the woods, then back at Jack. The quiet forest had just become a war zone, and she knew they were not safe yet. She nodded toward the dark tree line. "They have friends nearby," Sophia said, her voice steadying. "We need to move." The forest canopy offered little protection as the adrenaline of the initial skirmish began to fade. The cold reality of their situation quickly replaced the heat of combat. Jack wasted no time. He knelt beside the unconscious mercenary closest to him. His hands moved with practiced efficiency over the man's heavy tactical vest. He stripped a spare magazine, a combat radio, and a sleek GPS device. He checked the manufacturer's stamp on the assault rifle. "No serial numbers," Jack muttered. "High-end optics, ceramic body armor. These are not local thugs protecting a moonshine still. They are highly trained private military contractors." Sophia kept her sidearm raised. Her eyes scanned the dense tree line for any movement. "Contractors? Hired by who?" "This is a federally protected nature reserve. We do not have anything valuable enough to justify a private army." "Whoever has enough money to buy an army usually has a very dark secret to hide," Jack replied. He stood up and slung the captured rifle over his broad shoulder. He looked down at Titan. The German shepherd stood completely still, his black nose raised to the wind. The dog let out a low, vibrating growl deep in his chest. "More are coming," Jack said quietly. "We need to move, right now." Sophia nodded quickly. "Follow me. I know these trails better than anyone else in the county." They plunged deeper into the Colorado wilderness. The terrain grew steeper and more treacherous with every mile. Pine needles slicked the sharp inclines, and hidden roots threatened to twist their ankles with every hurried step. Titan took the lead. The large dog navigated the uneven ground with the effortless grace of a wild wolf. Jack stayed close behind Sophia. He constantly checked their rear, ensuring nothing sneaked up on their vulnerable flank. Survival in the wild often strips away societal masks, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of who a person really is. Jack watched Sophia push through the thick, unforgiving brush. She did not panic. She did not complain about the blistering pace. She moved with intense purpose. She was a natural protector, cut from the same cloth as he was. After a grueling hour of rapid ascent, they reached a small rocky outcropping concealed by heavy evergreen branches. Jack signaled for a halt. They crouched behind the massive boulders to catch their breath. The air at this altitude was thin and bitingly cold. "Talk to me," Jack said softly. "What exactly did you find out there that made them want to execute a federal ranger in broad daylight?" Sophia took a sip from her canteen and offered it to Jack. He declined, gesturing to his own hydration pack. "It started 3 weeks ago," Sophia explained. Her voice was steady, but laced with anger. "Water samples from the lower basin came back highly toxic. The local environmental lab thought it was a severe testing error. Then the animals started dying. First the fish, then the birds, and today, apex predators. I tracked a heavy vehicle trail up the mountain, far beyond the designated public access roads. Whatever they are hiding up here, it is actively leaking into the groundwater. It is a massive chemical contamination." Jack processed the information carefully. A private army protecting an illegal chemical dump in the middle of nowhere did not add up perfectly. Corporate chemical waste was usually disposed of quietly through corrupt channels, not guarded by elite, heavily armed mercenaries. There was a much larger and darker piece to this puzzle. A sharp crack echoed through the valley below. It sounded like a dry branch snapping under a heavy combat boot, amplified by the natural acoustics of the mountains. Titan whined softly and pressed his warm side against Jack's leg. "They are tracking us," Jack said. He pulled the captured combat radio from his belt. He had kept it off to avoid digital detection, but now he clicked the receiver just enough to catch the encrypted static. A faint, rhythmic beeping sounded through the tiny speaker. "They have tracking dogs," Jack realized, "and they are closing in very fast." "We can lose them in the canyon," Sophia suggested, pointing toward the north. "There is a complex series of caves near the ridge." Before she could finish her sentence, the sharp bark of a high-powered sniper rifle shattered the afternoon silence. The boulder inches from Sophia's head exploded into a violent shower of sharp granite fragments. Jack tackled her to the ground instantly. "Sniper!" he yelled. Another heavy-caliber shot rang out, chipping the rock exactly where Jack had been standing a second ago. They were completely pinned down. Jack peeked cautiously around the jagged edge of the rock. Across the wide ravine, barely visible among the dense trees, a tiny glint of sunlight reflected off a sniper scope. Below their current position, the chaotic sounds of barking dogs and shouting men grew louder. The mercenaries were executing a perfect flanking maneuver, using the elevated sniper to keep their targets trapped in place. "We cannot stay here," Jack said. He looked over the sheer edge of the outcropping. 50 feet below, a glacial river churned violently. White water crashed against jagged, dark rocks. It was a deadly, terrifying drop. Sophia followed his gaze. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. "You cannot be serious. That drop will kill us." "Their dogs will tear us apart in less than 3 minutes, Jack stated with grim calmness. "The sniper already has us zeroed. That freezing river is our only exit." A third heavy shot hit the rock, sending a fresh wave of debris raining down on their heads. Titan barked aggressively at the distant, unseen threat. "Take a deep breath," Jack ordered. "Keep your feet pointed straight down. Protect your head with your arms." Sophia looked at the raging water far below, then at the heavily armed men emerging from the tree line just 100 yards away. The choice was brutal, but it was incredibly simple. Jack secured his pack tightly. He looked at his loyal canine partner. "Ready, buddy?" Titan barked once, his body tense and ready to spring. "Go!" Jack shouted over the incoming gunfire. Sophia pushed off the rock, launching herself bravely into the empty mountain air. Jack followed a split second later, whistling sharply for Titan. The brave dog leaped fearlessly after his master. For 2 terrifying seconds, they fell through the freezing mountain air. The wind roared violently in their ears, completely drowning out the angry shouts of the mercenaries above. Then, the icy, crushing grip of the Colorado River swallowed them whole, plunging all 3 of them into a violent, freezing darkness. The freezing water hit them like a solid brick wall. The current immediately dragged them under, spinning them in a chaotic vortex of white foam and jagged rocks. The cold paralyzed Sophia's lungs. She fought the urge to open her mouth and gasp for air. Jack reached out in the churning darkness. His strong hand grabbed the thick strap of her backpack. He pulled her upward with incredible force. They breached the surface together, gasping for the thin mountain air. Titan paddled fiercely beside them. The brave dog kept his head high above the violent waves. Jack locked his arm around a massive floating log and guided them toward the eastern bank. The river bent sharply ahead. A natural overhang of dark stone created a shallow, hidden cave just above the waterline. Jack kicked his legs with all his remaining strength. He shoved Sophia toward the rocky shore. She scrambled onto the slippery stones, coughing up water and shivering violently. Jack pulled Titan out of the water, then dragged himself onto the dry ground. The cave was small and smelled of damp moss, but it offered crucial protection from the biting wind and the probing eyes of their enemies. Jack knew hypothermia would kill them much faster than any mercenary's bullet. He immediately went to work. He unzipped his waterproof survival pouch and pulled out a small magnesium fire starter. He gathered dry twigs and dead leaves from the back of the cave. Within minutes, a small smokeless fire crackled to life, casting a warm orange glow against the cold stone walls. Sophia sat close to the flames. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She stripped off her heavy outer jacket to let it dry. Jack opened his medical kit. He knelt beside her and gently cleaned a deep bleeding scratch on her forehead, a souvenir from the sniper's shattered bullet. "Hold still," Jack instructed quietly. He applied an antiseptic pad. Sophia flinched slightly, but kept her eyes fixed on the fire. "Thank you for everything back there. I thought I was dead." "You handled yourself well," Jack replied. He wrapped a small bandage over the cut. "Most people freeze when the bullets start flying. You fired back. That takes guts." Sophia looked at Titan. The large dog lay near the fire, absorbing the heat. He rested his heavy head on his front paws, but kept his ears swiveled toward the cave entrance. "I grew up in these woods," Sophia said softly. Her voice carried a mix of sadness and fierce determination. "My father taught me how to track, how to listen to the forest. I became a ranger to protect this place. The wildlife here cannot fight back against poachers or toxic waste. Someone has to speak for them. Someone has to stand between them and human greed." Jack sat back and looked at the dancing flames. He understood that kind of devotion perfectly. He had spent his entire adult life standing on the front lines, acting as a shield for those who could not defend themselves. "I get it," Jack said. "I joined the Navy for a similar reason. There is a lot of evil in the world. Sometimes the only way to stop bad men is to send other men who are willing to do the hard things. You protect the land. I protect the people. The mission is essentially the same." True strength rarely reveals itself in the heat of a firefight, but rather in these quiet, vulnerable moments when 2 entirely different worlds align to confront a singular evil. Jack and Sophia came from different backgrounds, yet they shared the exact same unbreakable core. The night passed slowly. They took turns sleeping, though neither truly rested. The looming threat of the mercenaries kept their nerves on edge. As the first faint light of dawn crept into the cave, Titan stood up abruptly. The hair on the back of his neck bristled. He let out a low, warning rumble and paced toward the cave exit. Jack immediately reached for his captured rifle. He motioned for Sophia to stay quiet. He moved to the cave entrance and scanned the riverbank. There was no sign of the armed men. There were no tracking dogs. Titan did not look at the ground. He raised his snout high into the cold morning wind. The dog sneezed violently, shaking his head in obvious discomfort. Jack stepped out of the cave and took a deep breath. A harsh, acrid smell burned the back of his throat. It was not the scent of a campfire or a dead animal. It smelled like bleach mixed with sulfur and burning plastic. "Do you smell that?" Jack whispered. Sophia stepped out beside him and instantly covered her nose. "Chemicals. It is incredibly strong. It smells exactly like the toxic residue I found in the water samples, just 100 times more concentrated." Titan let out a sharp whine and began walking along the rocky shoreline, following the invisible trail of the toxic scent. "He has the source," Jack said. "We follow him. Keep your weapon ready and stay low." They left the safety of the cave and followed the German shepherd up a steep, treacherous incline. The forest here looked sick. The leaves on the evergreen trees were turning a sickly yellow, and the ground was completely devoid of insect life. The toxic smell grew thicker with every step, making their eyes water. After 30 minutes of silent climbing, Titan stopped at the edge of a massive granite cliff. He crouched low to the ground and growled at a cluster of boulders 50 yards ahead. Jack and Sophia crawled to the edge of the tree line and peered through the branches. The rocks ahead were not natural. They were painted steel panels, meticulously designed to look like the surrounding mountain face. A massive industrial-grade exhaust fan hummed quietly behind a steel grate, venting the foul chemical air directly into the forest canopy. Below the fan, a heavy blast door was built seamlessly into the rock. Sophia stared at the massive structure in absolute horror. "That is not a simple illegal dumping ground. That is a fortress." "It is a fully operational underground base," Jack corrected grimly. He checked the magazine of his rifle. "And we just found the front door." The heavy hum of the industrial exhaust fan vibrated through the soles of Jack's boots. He stared at the painted steel panels blending perfectly into the mountain face. Retreating seemed like the most logical military decision. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and completely cut off from any support. However, Jack knew exactly how private military organizations operated. If they retreated now and called the authorities, this entire base would vanish within 48 hours. The mercenaries would wipe their servers, collapse the tunnels, and relocate, leaving behind only the poisoned water and a trail of dead bodies. Jack turned to Sophia. "We cannot just walk away. If we leave without hard proof, the government will spend months debating jurisdictions while these people pack up and disappear. We need to get inside. We need to know exactly what they are manufacturing." Sophia looked at the heavily fortified blast door, then traced the natural fault lines in the towering granite cliff above it. Her hazel eyes narrowed as she processed the geological layout. "We do not have to go through the front door," Sophia said confidently. She pointed toward a jagged ridge high above the exhaust vent. "This specific area is part of the old Silver Creek claim. Miners honeycombed this entire mountain with shafts back in the late 1800s. The builders of this facility likely expanded the main mine tunnel to create their base, but they could not have sealed every single auxiliary shaft. I know these rock formations. I can find a back way in." Jack nodded. He trusted her local knowledge completely. "Lead the way." They climbed for another hour, scaling the treacherous loose shale on the backside of the mountain. Titan navigated the steep drops effortlessly, his paws finding purchase where human boots slipped. Sophia finally stopped beside a narrow, unassuming fissure hidden behind a thick wall of dead pine brush. A steady stream of cold, stale air blew outward from the crack. "This is an old ventilation shaft," Sophia whispered. "It connects to the lower levels of the old mine." Jack drew his captured rifle. He clicked the safety off. He motioned for Titan to take the lead. The large German shepherd slipped into the dark fissure without a sound. Jack and Sophia followed closely behind, swallowed by the suffocating darkness of the mountain. They moved slowly through the jagged rock tunnel. The air grew progressively warmer and more humid. Fear has a strange way of sharpening the human senses, stripping away the trivial noise of everyday life and leaving only a pure, primal instinct to survive. Jack felt every shift in the air current and heard every drop of water echoing in the distance. The rough stone floor eventually transitioned to smooth, poured concrete. Faint yellow light spilled from a corner ahead. Jack held up a clenched fist. Sophia stopped instantly. Titan froze in place, his ears pinned back. Jack crept forward and peeked around the concrete corner. Two mercenaries stood guarding a heavy steel security door. They wore full tactical gear and held compact submachine guns. One of them casually tossed a cigarette butt onto the floor. A loud firefight here would echo through the entire facility. Jack needed absolute silence. He looked at Titan and tapped his own chest, then pointed a single finger at the guard on the left. The dog understood the silent command perfectly. Jack picked up a loose piece of gravel. He tossed it lightly down the opposite end of the corridor. The small rock clattered against the concrete. Both guards instantly raised their weapons and turned toward the noise. Titan lunged from the shadows. The dog crossed the distance in a silent blur. He clamped his powerful jaws directly onto the first guard's weapon strap, violently jerking the man forward and slamming him face first into the concrete floor. Before the second guard could pull his trigger, Jack closed the gap. He drove the butt of his rifle into the man's solar plexus, knocking the air from his lungs. Jack followed up with a precise, devastating strike to the side of the guard's neck. The man collapsed in a heap. Titan pinned his target to the ground, barring his teeth inches from the guard's throat, until Jack stepped in and rendered the man unconscious with a swift sleeper hold. The entire takedown took less than 5 seconds. Not a single shot was fired. Jack quickly dragged the unconscious men into the dark tunnel. He searched their pockets and found a key card. He swiped it at the security door. The heavy metal barrier clicked and slid open. Beyond the door lay a maze of modern, well-lit corridors built directly into the hollowed-out mountain. Security cameras hung from the ceiling at regular intervals. "Follow the electrical conduits," Sophia whispered, pointing to the thick bundles of wires running along the ceiling. "They will lead us to the main power source, which usually houses the central servers. I can navigate us through the blind spots. The miners always followed the quartz veins. The new builders just paved over them." Using her deep understanding of the mountain's natural structure, Sophia guided them flawlessly. She anticipated the layout of the facility by reading the rock walls exposed between the steel panels. They slipped past 2 more heavily armed patrols, hiding in deep alcoves and old mining offshoots, just seconds before the guards marched past. Finally, they reached a heavy set of double doors, marked with severe biohazard warnings. Jack carefully pushed the doors open. They stepped out onto a high metal catwalk. The sight below them stole the breath from their lungs. They stood overlooking a cavernous subterranean chamber the size of a professional football stadium. Brilliant white industrial lights illuminated rows upon rows of massive glass-lined chemical vats. A complex web of thick pipes pumped a glowing, sickly yellow liquid between the containers. Dozens of workers wearing heavy yellow hazmat suits operated forklifts, loading unmarked metal barrels onto wooden pallets. This was not a simple illegal dumping operation. It was a massive, highly organized chemical production factory. Sophia gripped the cold metal railing of the catwalk. Her knuckles turned white. She recognized the hazard symbols painted on the side of the central mixing tanks. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute horror. "That is not just toxic waste. That is a synthesized neurotoxin. The volume they are producing here is catastrophic. If even one of those main vats leaks into the underground aquifer, it will not just poison this forest. It will contaminate the water supply for the entire state of Colorado. Millions of people will die." Jack stared down at the army of workers and the heavily armed guards patrolling the factory floor. The stakes had just escalated from a local environmental crime to an imminent act of mass terrorism. They did not just need evidence anymore. They needed to stop this completely. Jack led the way down the narrow metal stairwell. They moved with absolute silence. The high catwalk connected directly to a suspended glass control room overlooking the massive factory floor. The room housed the central servers for the entire underground facility. It appeared currently empty. Jack pushed the heavy security door open and signaled for Sophia to enter quickly. Titan followed without making a sound, immediately sitting by the doorframe. His sharp eyes scanned the dark corridor outside, standing as an unblinking sentinel. Sophia dropped her heavy backpack on the floor. She pulled out a ruggedized, waterproof tablet issued to federal park rangers. It was not meant for high-level cyber espionage, but it featured a direct satellite uplink and a universal data port. She knelt beside the primary server tower. She connected a thick cable from her tablet directly into the mainframe. "How long do you need?" Jack asked. He kept his back pressed flat against the wall, his eyes fixed on the factory workers moving far below them. "I have to bypass their local encryption protocols," Sophia whispered, typing rapidly. Her fingers flew across the digital keyboard. "The firewall is military grade. Give me at least 3 minutes to break through." Jack nodded tightly. He checked the hallway again. The facility operated with terrifying efficiency. Forklifts moved heavy metal pallets of the toxic chemical. Armed guards patrolled the floor in rigid overlapping patterns. There was zero margin for error here. A green progress bar finally appeared on Sophia's screen. The encrypted data began to transfer into her tablet. She opened a secondary window to read the decoded manifests and shipping schedules. The soft blue light of the screen illuminated her face. Her expression shifted from intense concentration to absolute horror. She went completely pale. "Jack, you need to see this right now," Sophia said, her voice shaking. Jack stepped away from the glass window. He crouched next to her and looked at the glowing screen. "They are not just dumping toxic waste to cut costs," Sophia explained. She pointed a trembling finger at a highly detailed list of target locations. "Denver, Phoenix, Las Vegas. They plan to deliberately introduce this synthesized neurotoxin into the municipal water supplies of major western cities." Jack read the logistical files. The operation was meticulously planned. Delivery routes, access points to reservoirs, and distribution timelines were all laid out in perfect corporate formatting. Why? What is the objective behind mass murder? "Pure profit," Sophia said, her voice laced with deep disgust. The parent company funding this secret facility also owns the largest water purification and emergency disaster response contracts in the United States. They are going to create a catastrophic public health crisis, then swoop in and charge the federal government billions of dollars to clean it up. They are manufacturing a deadly disaster just to sell the exclusive cure. Greed is the most dangerous pathogen on Earth, capable of infecting the human soul and turning men into monsters who casually weigh innocent lives against quarterly profit margins. Jack stared at the screen. The sheer scale of the evil was difficult to fully comprehend. This was an act of domestic terrorism disguised as a strategic corporate business plan. "Copy absolutely everything," Jack ordered, his voice cold and hard. "We need every single byte of data to bring this entire organization down." "It is at 60%, Sophia said, watching the progress bar crawl forward. A low, vibrating growl erupted from deep within Titan's chest. The German shepherd stood up abruptly. The thick fur on his back stood straight up. He stared intently down the dark corridor leading to the control room. He bared his sharp teeth. Jack instantly raised his captured rifle. "Someone is coming." "I need 2 more minutes to finish the download," Sophia pleaded. "You have exactly 1, Jack replied. He moved to the dark side of the doorframe. He aimed his weapon straight down the hallway. Heavy combat boots echoed loudly on the concrete floor. It was not a standard 2-man security patrol. The footsteps were too numerous and far too synchronized. A group of commanders was approaching the server room directly. Jack braced his body. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate down to a steady rhythm. He calculated the angles and prepared to open fire the second the enemy breached the doorway. He could not let them see Sophia downloading the files. He had to draw their attention immediately. The automatic door slid open with a soft hiss. 3 heavily armed guards stepped into the room, their weapons raised and ready. Jack kept himself perfectly hidden in the deep blind spot behind the doorframe. A 4th man walked calmly into the room behind the guards. He was a tall, physically imposing figure. He had graying hair at his temples and a jagged, pale scar running along his sharp jawline. He wore a tailored black combat uniform that lacked any military unit insignia. He radiated a cold, absolute authority. He stopped in the center of the room. He looked directly at the server tower where Sophia knelt. Jack stepped out from the shadows. He leveled his rifle directly at the commander's chest. "Call your men off, or you die right now." The commander did not flinch. He did not reach for his weapon. He slowly turned his head. He looked Jack directly in the eyes. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed his scarred, weathered face. "Your shooting stance is still too wide, Jack," the man said. His voice was deep, commanding, and terrifyingly familiar. "I told you 100 times to keep your elbows tucked tight in close-quarters combat." Jack froze completely. His heart slammed violently against his ribs. His finger trembled slightly on the trigger. The captured combat radio slipped from his tactical vest, fell through the air, and crashed loudly onto the hard concrete floor. It was Elias. Elias was Jack's former commanding officer. He was the legendary mentor who had taught Jack everything he knew about survival, advanced combat, and unconventional warfare. The United States military had officially declared Elias dead during a classified, highly disastrous mission in the mountains of the Middle East exactly 5 years ago. Jack had personally attended his memorial service. Jack had folded the flag given to Elias's widow. Yet here he stood, breathing, smiling, and commanding a private army. The respected ghost from Jack's past was the mastermind behind this massive, deadly conspiracy. Jack stared at the ghost of his mentor. The radio lay shattered on the floor. Betrayal rarely announces itself with a roar. It usually arrives in the quiet, familiar voice of someone you trusted with your life. Elias looked exactly as he had 5 years ago. He wore the same arrogant posture. He carried the same cold confidence, only the jagged scar along his jaw was new. "You are supposed to be dead," Jack said. His voice sounded hollow inside the concrete room. Elias chuckled. It was a cold, humorless sound. "Death is a very useful tool, Jack. It frees you from obligations. It frees you from blindly following orders from politicians. Those politicians do not care if we bleed out in the dirt. I simply chose to work for myself. I chose to take control." "By poisoning millions of innocent people?" Jack gripped his rifle tighter. His knuckles turned white. "By capitalizing on an inevitable disaster," Elias corrected smoothly. He paced slowly across the concrete floor. His 3 guards kept their weapons trained firmly on Jack. "The world is already broken. I am just charging a premium for the bandage. The parent company pays exceedingly well for my tactical expertise. You could join me." "You were always my best operator. We could run this operation together." Jack felt a sickening twist in his stomach. The man who taught him honor had traded it for a massive paycheck. Behind Jack, the server console beeped rapidly. A glaring red warning flashed across Sophia's tablet screen. The local firewall had detected the massive data extraction. A harsh, blaring siren erupted throughout the underground facility. Flashing red strobe lights bathed the control room in a chaotic, bloody glow. Elias dropped the friendly mentor facade instantly. His eyes went totally flat. "Kill them both. Secure that server immediately." The 3 guards raised their weapons. They did not account for Titan. The German Shepherd exploded from the shadows near the doorway. He did not bark. He moved with pure, lethal intent. One guard tried to flank Sophia to stop the download. Titan launched himself through the air. He hit the man squarely in the chest. The guard fired wildly into the ceiling as 90 pounds of muscle and teeth brought him crashing to the floor. Titan locked his jaws onto the guard's wrist, neutralizing the immediate threat to Sophia. The sudden distraction gave Jack the split second he needed. His ingrained military training overrode his emotional shock. He dropped to one knee. He squeezed the trigger of his captured rifle. He fired a controlled burst at the second guard, dropping the man instantly. Elias dove behind a heavy steel server rack just as Jack swept the barrel toward him. Bullets sparked violently against the thick metal, missing Elias by mere inches. "Sophia, status!" Jack yelled over the deafening alarm. Sophia hit the final key on her tablet. The progress bar hit 100%. She yanked the thick cable from the server and shoved the tablet into her backpack. "I have it! I have everything we need!" "Move!" Jack ordered. He fired another burst toward Elias and the remaining guard to keep them pinned down. "Titan, here!" The dog released his grip on the screaming guard and bounded back to Jack's side. Jack grabbed Sophia by the tactical vest. He pushed her toward the rear exit of the control room. It led to a narrow, spiraling metal staircase plunging deeper into the mountain. They burst through the heavy door. Jack turned and fired blindly back into the server room to cover their retreat. He slammed the door shut and shot the electronic keypad, fusing the lock completely. "Go down!" Jack commanded. They descended rapidly. The metal stairs clanged loudly beneath their boots. The alarm continued to blare, echoing off the cavernous walls. Sophia slipped on a grated step. Jack caught her arm, stabilizing her instantly. They kept moving downward into the darkness. "Who was that man?" Sophia gasped as they ran. "My former commanding officer," Jack replied bluntly. He did not waste breath on a longer explanation. The pain of the revelation still burned, but he compartmentalized it. Survival came first. Mourning the corruption of an idol would have to wait. They reached the bottom of the stairwell. A heavy steel door stood slightly ajar. Jack kicked it wide open. They stumbled into a massive sub-basement. The air here was incredibly thick. It smelled intensely of sulfur and raw, burning chemicals. Giant cylindrical vats towered over them, glowing faintly in the dim emergency lighting. Thick pipes snaked across the floor and walls, pulsing with the toxic liquid. This was the primary storage level. Millions of gallons of the synthesized neurotoxin waited here for distribution to the cities. Gunfire echoed from the stairwell high above them. Elias and his men had breached the fused door. They were coming down fast. "We are trapped," Sophia said. She looked wildly around the cavernous room. There were no obvious exits. She only saw endless rows of massive chemical tanks and heavy machinery. Jack surveyed the room with a tactical eye. His gaze locked onto a large staging area near the center. Crates of high-yield industrial explosives sat stacked neatly on wooden pallets. The workers likely used them for expanding the deep underground tunnels. An idea formed in his mind. It was reckless and highly dangerous, but they had no other options left. "We are not trapped," Jack said. He pointed toward the crates of explosives. "We are going to blow this entire facility back to the Stone Age." Sophia stared at him in disbelief. "If we detonate that much ordnance down here, the mountain will collapse directly on top of us." "Then we better find a way out before the timer hits 0, Jack replied. He ran toward the explosives. He signaled for Titan to watch the stairwell door. Elias was coming down, and Jack intended to give his former mentor a proper, fiery farewell. Jack sprinted toward the wooden pallets holding the heavy industrial explosives. The wooden crates bore faded hazard warnings. He pried one open with his tactical knife. Inside lay neat rows of high-yield C4 blocks and digital detonators. The facility workers used these tools to expand the deep underground tunnels. Now, Jack intended to use them to erase this entire nightmare from the face of the earth. Sophia ran to a massive steel hatch at the far end of the cavernous chamber. She pulled her tablet out and plugged it directly into the archaic wall terminal beside the heavy door. Her fingers flew across the cracked digital screen. "I can bypass the electronic lockdown," Sophia shouted over the distant wail of the facility alarm. "But the hydraulic system is severely damaged. The manual override requires a physical connection. I have to hold the circuit breaker open manually, or the heavy hatch will slam shut and lock us in permanently." Jack grabbed an armful of explosives. He moved rapidly between the towering chemical vats. He slapped the sticky C4 blocks onto the primary structural supports, holding the massive tanks aloft. He worked with methodical, cold precision. He wired the digital detonators in a complex daisy chain configuration to ensure a simultaneous blast. Time is an unforgiving adversary. It stretches infinitely when waiting for a loved one, but it vanishes in a heartbeat when survival hangs in the balance. Jack felt every second slipping away into the toxic air. "Set the timer," Jack called out loudly. "Give us 3 minutes." He finished arming the final explosive charge on the largest chemical vat. The red digital numbers blinked to life. 2 minutes and 59 seconds. Titan stood firmly by the stairwell door. The brave German shepherd let out a ferocious bark. The heavy metal door groaned under a massive impact from the other side. "Sophia, get ready to pull that breaker," Jack ordered. He raised his captured rifle and aimed directly at the buckling steel door. The heavy door exploded inward, completely ripped off its hinges by a breaching charge. Thick gray smoke poured into the sub-basement. Jack fired a controlled burst into the smoke cloud. No one fell. A lone figure stepped through the hazy smoke. Elias walked calmly into the room. He held no rifle. He had discarded his heavy tactical vest. He rolled his broad shoulders, his scarred face twisted into a mask of pure, concentrated authority. "My men are securing the upper levels," Elias said. His deep voice easily cut through the ambient noise of the buzzing alarm. "This ends right here, Jack. Just you and me, like the old days." Elias lunged forward with terrifying speed. Jack barely had time to drop his empty rifle and raise his arms. Elias threw a devastating right hook. Jack blocked it, but the sheer kinetic force of the blow sent him stumbling backward. Elias followed up instantly with a sweeping leg kick that caught Jack squarely in the ribs. Jack hit the concrete floor hard. He tasted warm blood in his mouth. He rolled backward, narrowly avoiding a crushing stomp from Elias's heavy combat boot. Jack sprang to his feet. He drew his tactical knife, the metal scraping sharply against its sheath. Elias smiled coldly and drew his own combat blade. "I taught you exactly how to hold that knife. I know every single countermove you possess." They clashed violently in the center of the toxic room. Bright sparks flew as their steel blades collided. Elias was absolutely right. He anticipated Jack's every strike. When Jack thrust forward, Elias sidestepped flawlessly and delivered a punishing blow to Jack's kidney. Jack gasped in severe pain, but managed to slice the fabric of Elias's dark shirt. Titan barked aggressively and charged forward to protect his master. Elias spun around with lethal grace. He delivered a brutal, sweeping kick to the dog's chest. Titan yelped loudly and slid across the smooth concrete floor, temporarily stunned by the heavy impact. "Leave the dog out of this," Jack growled. He attacked with renewed, desperate fury. Over by the heavy steel hatch, Sophia watched the digital timer on the closest explosive charge. 1 minute and 30 seconds left. She gripped the heavy metal circuit breaker. She pulled it downward with all her remaining physical strength. The massive steel hatch groaned loudly and began to slide open, revealing a dark, ascending service tunnel. She had to use both hands and her entire body weight to keep the heavy lever in place. Her muscles burned intensely. She could not leave her post to help Jack. Jack and Elias traded brutal, exhausting strikes. Blood streamed down Jack's face from a deep cut above his right eye. Elias moved with a fluid, relentless rhythm. He trapped Jack's knife arm, twisted the wrist sharply, and forced Jack to drop the weapon. Elias drove his knee into Jack's stomach, then slammed his clenched fist into Jack's jaw. Jack staggered backward until his back hit the cold steel of a massive chemical vat. Elias pressed the advantage immediately. He pinned Jack against the metal tank. He raised his knife for a lethal downward strike. "You were a good soldier, Jack," Elias whispered, "but you were always too soft for the real world." 60 seconds remained on the timer. The red numbers flashed brightly through the dim light. Jack looked at the man who had taught him how to survive the darkest corners of the earth. He realized Elias relied entirely on his flawless memory of Jack's training. Elias expected Jack to fight exactly like the disciplined young soldier he once knew. Jack needed to fight completely unpredictably. He needed to abandon the textbook. Instead of trying to block the descending knife with his hands, Jack threw his entire body weight forward. He head-butted Elias squarely in the face with devastating force. The sickening crunch of breaking cartilage echoed loudly in the cavernous room. Elias staggered backward, dropping his knife and clutching his broken nose in absolute shock. Jack did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He stepped forward, planted his feet firmly, and delivered a crushing uppercut that lifted Elias completely off his feet. The older man crashed heavily onto the hard concrete floor. He did not move. Jack stood over his fallen mentor, breathing heavily. His chest heaved with exhaustion. He looked at the timer on the vat. 30 seconds. "Jack, hurry!" Sophia screamed from the open hatch. Her arms shook violently from the immense effort of holding the heavy lever down. Titan shook off the pain and trotted quickly over to Jack, letting out a soft, urgent whine. "Let us go, buddy," Jack said. He grabbed Titan's thick collar and sprinted toward the open hatch. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. Jack and Titan dove through the narrow opening. Sophia released the heavy lever instantly. The massive steel hatch slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang, sealing the toxic sub-basement completely. "Run!" Jack yelled. They sprinted up the dark, steep service tunnel. They pushed their exhausted bodies to the absolute physical limit, racing against the deadly countdown. 10 seconds, 5 seconds, the timer reached 0. 0. The bright red number flashed in Jack's mind right as the earth violently rebelled. A deafening roar swallowed the narrow service tunnel. The thick steel hatch behind them buckled under an unimaginable kinetic force, groaning like a dying mechanical beast. Intense heat radiated through the metal, instantly blistering the cold, damp air. "Keep moving forward," Jack yelled. He pushed Sophia ahead of him. The invisible shockwave caught them a fraction of a second later. It threw them completely off their feet. Jack hit the rocky floor hard. He immediately curled his body, shielding his head with his arms as loose gravel rained down from the crumbling ceiling. The underground facility was literally tearing itself apart. The massive volume of C4 ignited the highly unstable chemical vats, creating a localized subterranean firestorm that incinerated the neurotoxin completely. The extreme heat neutralized the deadly poison just as Jack had planned, but it also severely compromised the structural integrity of the entire mountain. Titan scrambled to his paws. The dog whined urgently, scratching at the dirt path ahead. Jack grabbed Sophia's heavy harness and hauled her upright. Thick, choking dust filled their lungs. Total darkness consumed the tunnel as the facility's main power grid finally failed. "I cannot see anything," Sophia coughed aggressively. She gripped her backpack tightly against her chest. It held the rugged tablet containing every single piece of encrypted evidence needed to expose the corrupt parent company. "Follow the dog," Jack commanded. Titan possessed a built-in biological navigation system completely unaffected by the darkness. The highly trained German shepherd darted forward, letting out sharp, rhythmic barks to guide the blinded humans. Jack kept his left hand sliding along the rough stone wall and his right hand firmly gripping Sophia's shoulder. They sprinted blindly up the steep, treacherous incline. The ground shook violently a second time. A massive slab of rock crashed down just inches behind Jack's heels. The tunnel was rapidly collapsing. Elias and his private mercenary army were buried forever beneath millions of tons of crushed granite and raging fire. The ghost of Jack's past was finally laid to rest in a tomb of his own making. They ran until their lungs burned for oxygen and their leg muscles screamed in sheer physical agony. Sophia stumbled blindly in the dark. Her knee struck a sharp, jagged rock. She cried out in sudden pain and crashed to the ground. Jack stopped immediately. He knelt beside her in the pitch-black tunnel. "Are you badly injured?" "It is my knee," Sophia gasped. She tried to stand but faltered, her leg refusing to support her weight. "I cannot run fast enough to outrun the collapse." "Leave me here, Jack. Just take the tablet and go." "We leave absolutely no one behind," Jack stated with fierce finality. He wrapped her arm securely around his broad neck and hoisted her up. He supported the vast majority of her body weight. "Titan, find the exit. Go find the air." The dog barked twice and bounded ahead into the gloom. They limped upward at a grueling pace. The air gradually grew cooler. The heavy, suffocating scent of pulverized rock mixed with the faint, crisp smell of living pine trees. Jack pushed his exhausted body far past its normal physical limits. He drew on years of brutal military conditioning. He focused solely on putting one foot in front of the other, refusing to let the mountain claim them. A faint sliver of pale gray light pierced the darkness ahead. Titan stood directly in the narrow opening, barking frantically at the sky. Jack and Sophia pushed through the tight stone fissure. They collapsed heavily onto the snow-covered ground of a high mountain ridge. The freezing morning air hit their lungs like tiny, sharp needles, but it was undoubtedly the sweetest thing Jack had ever breathed. They crawled desperately away from the fissure just as the ground beneath it gave way completely. A massive sinkhole opened up with a terrifying crunch, swallowing the tunnel entrance whole. A thick plume of dark gray smoke billowed high into the dawn sky, carrying the harmless, incinerated remains of the deadly chemical facility. Jack rolled onto his back. He stared up at the pale, clearing sky. Titan trotted over and gently licked the dirt and dried blood off Jack's bruised face. The loyal dog let out a satisfied, exhausted sigh and lay down directly across Jack's chest. Sophia sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in her knee. She clutched her backpack tightly to her chest. She looked at the rising column of smoke, then turned to look at Jack. "We actually did it. We stopped them from hurting millions of people." "You stopped them," Jack corrected quietly. "You found the hidden trail. You decoded the security firewall. You downloaded the primary manifest. I just provided the necessary fireworks." Sophia smiled softly despite her exhaustion. She reached out and rested her hand gently on Titan's head. "We make a pretty formidable team." Sometimes the total destruction of a dark past is the absolute only way to guarantee the safety of a bright future. Jack looked out over the vast, untouched expanse of the Colorado National Forest. The evergreen trees stood tall and resilient against the wind. The river flowed clean and unburdened in the deep valley below. For 5 long years, Jack had carried the heavy, suffocating weight of Elias's supposed tragic death. He had let guilt and grief silently dictate his life. Now the ugly truth was out, and the heavy burden was completely gone. The fire deep below had consumed not just the physical poison, but the emotional ghosts that had haunted him for so long. A distant, rhythmic thumping echoed sharply through the quiet mountains. Jack recognized the distinct sound immediately. Heavy military rotor blades. 3 black tactical helicopters crested the eastern ridge, flying straight toward the smoke plume. Following closely behind them, the faint wail of emergency sirens echoed up from the main forest access roads. The massive seismic event had triggered an immediate and overwhelming federal response. "Your friends are arriving," Jack said. He carefully helped Sophia to her feet. Sophia pulled her tablet from the protective bag. The screen was badly cracked, but the power light still blinked a steady green. This digital data will put the parent company executives behind bars for the rest of their miserable lives. The federal authorities will have everything they need to secure a conviction. She looked up at Jack. Her hazel eyes were bright and full of genuine gratitude. "What happens to you now?" Jack patted Titan's side affectionately. He looked at the morning sun breaking brilliantly over the snow-capped peaks. The warm, golden light washed over the rugged landscape, actively chasing away the freezing shadows of the night. He felt a profound sense of inner peace that he had not experienced in over a decade. He did not need to run anymore. He did not need to hide in the remote wilderness to find quiet. The raging war inside his head was finally over. "I think my vacation leave is officially canceled," Jack replied with a slight, genuine smile. "But for the first time in a very long time, I am actually looking forward to going home." Titan barked happily, his thick tail wagging excitedly against the fresh snow. They stood side by side on the high mountain ridge. They watched the black helicopters circle the smoking crater below. The dawn broke fully over the horizon, bringing the bright promise of a new day, a protected forest, and a hard-fought justice that would echo far beyond the silent mountains. The journey of Jack, Sophia, and the brave Titan teaches us a profound lesson. True courage is not just about fighting on a battlefield. It is about standing up for what is right, protecting the innocent, and confronting the ghosts of our past. Even when we face overwhelming odds or betrayal from those we trust the most, the light of justice can still prevail if we refuse to surrender. Personally, I believe that everyone has a warrior inside them, waiting for the right moment to protect what they love. Sometimes it takes a leap of faith into freezing waters or the unwavering loyalty of a dog to remind us that we are never truly alone in our struggles. May God bless you with the strength to overcome your own challenges and the courage to protect the people around you. If you believe in the power of loyalty and justice, please comment Amen below. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your family and friends. Leave a comment to let us know your thoughts and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope and bravery.